Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We're in the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 154, Except to Heaven She Is Nought. Now, the obvious question is going to be the antecedent to the pronoun she. Who are we referencing here? Some have argued she's talking about a daisy. Some have argued that this is another self-referential poem where Emily is referencing herself as a daisy. And of course, we've seen this already in our study. This, by the way, is another poem of the many that were sent to Susan Gilbert. This is another one of those. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to the intro lecture. We just mentioned Sue, for example. And I'm hopeful that you've already studied with us the preceding 153 poems. We just finished with Death is the Only Secret. Now, the question here will be, who is the she of this poem? And of course, it can be a number of possibilities as we read it. Notice the 5 excepts here, the repetition of excepts, the anaphorias of the first 3 lines. Except to heaven, she is not, except for angels, lone, except to some wide wandering bee, a flower superfluous blown. Except for winds, provincial, except by butterflies, unnoticed as a single dew that on the acre lies. The smallest housewife in the grass, yet take her from the lawn, and somebody has lost the face that made existence home. Now, the simplest way to read this poem is, of course, to say that Emily is celebrating a daisy. And, of course, they're ubiquitous in the spring, and yet she makes the argument that to remove a flower or a daisy would, in fact, completely change everything about home. But I think there is a more profound reading of this poem, and I think that Emily's identification with the daisy allows us to maybe go here. Notice, except to heaven, she is not. Not is used in 18 different poems. And in poem 458, we have infinities of not. And notice, in other words, she doesn't matter except to heaven, whoever she is. Let's imagine that Emily's self-referential, talking about herself. Except for angels, lone. In other words, I'm all alone. Except to some wide wandering bee, please remember that the bee often identified with Sue, who, again, she sent this poem to, a flower superfluous blown, except for winds, provincial, except by, and of course you can read winds here in a figurative way, except by butterflies, unnoticed as a single dew that on the acre lies. And this word unnoticed, I think, to me is the key word of the poem. In poem 141, you'll remember unnoticed, 757 and 1746, run those to ground. And as well, this idea of unnoticed will be a central one. And then, it almost as if it's the giveaway that it is Emily, the smallest housewife. You'll remember that in 77 poems, we've already commented on this, the word small or smallest gets used. In poem 486, I was the slightest in the house. Poem 486, it's a poem, it's a fun poem. We're obviously going to study it here in a while. Let me just read a few of those lines for you. 486. I find this a fascinating little poem. I was the slightest in the house. I took the smallest room at night, my little lamp and book, and one geranium. So stationed, I could catch the mint that never ceased to fall in just my basket. Let me think. I'm sure that this was all. I never spoke unless addressed, and then 'twas brief and low. I could not bear to live aloud, the racket shamed me so. And if it had not been so far and anyone I knew were going, I'd often thought, how noteless, I could die. I think this poem is the poem, and at level 3A, well, obviously we can identify to some degree the two readings. Unnoticed as a single dew that on the acre lies, the smallest housewife in the grass. 6 different poems will use the word housewife. Yet, and all of that is the yet. All leads to yet. Yet, take her from the lawn. That is to say, remove Emily from the family, or if you will, that collection of her associations. And somebody, notice as opposed to nobody, of the previous poem of 153, And somebody has lost the face that made existence. Home. Of course, the use of the dash, the word home capitalized, and then exclamation point. What is she saying here at 2a? Well, I think her argument is that it is important to treasure even the smallest things, the most unnoticed, the most insignificant things. At 2b, I love the repetition of except. I love her word choice, not, unnoticed, smallest. At 3a, well, obviously poem 486 comes to mind. I'd like to take us, though, to Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on this classic, and obviously one that I think that Emily very much channeling in this moment. You remember at the very end that he says he prays best, who understands best all things, loves all things, both great and small. For the dear God who loveth all, he made and loveth all. This idea that even the small things matter. Finally, at 3b, what was a time that you took something or someone for granted, and you didn't miss it or them until they were gone? Is it possible this is a poem about Emily recognizing how unnoticed she is? Not today, right? Not with our conversations anyway. Thank you.